What's the last thing you expected to hear from the Canadian government this week? Was it A, National Parks 10, National Defense 0, B, gee, thanks for coming, Liz, now get out, or C, drugs don't hurt people, politicians do? If you pick C, dude, this show's for you. This week on Global Sunday, are we really ready to take this country one toke over the line? Good evening, everyone. I'm Heather Hiscox in Calgary. Welcome to Global Sunday, the forum for the issues and topics that matter most to Canadians. Tonight, you don't hear anything from the Senate for years, and then bam, they want to legalize pot. Sell it, apply the GST, the whole package. And then this week in the throne speech, the government says legalization not likely, but they will consider decriminalization that would put possession of marijuana on par with a parking ticket. Just a fine, no jail time. In most parts of this country, you can't even take a nice bottle of wine out in public. So what is going on? Is the government serious about all this? And what about our friends to the south? What will the West Wing say if Ottawa declares neutrality in the war on drugs? We'll talk to the director of White House drug policy in just a few minutes. But first, joining us in Toronto, an advocate of a more lenient, and some would say more realistic approach to marijuana, Osgoode Hall law professor Alan Young. Mr. Young, welcome.
Hello.
First of all, in the past couple of weeks, Mr. Young, there's been nothing but talk of legalization, now decriminalization. Why is this issue so hot now?
Too much talk. We should have done something about it 30 years ago, but I think the reason why it's front and center is because we live now in an era where there's more Canadians smoking marijuana than ever, plus the fact we're devoting more law enforcement resources to prohibiting cannabis. So there's sort of a logjam there. More people smoking, more police officers enforcing the law. Something's got to break. If Canada does in fact go this route, decriminalization, how would a decriminalized Canada look and work different from what we have now under prohibition? No different than it is today. The only thing that would happen is we'd free up a lot of money to fight predatory crime, serious crime. But in terms of Canadian social life, we're not going to become a nation of potheads. Studies show that any country that decriminalizes, consumption rates usually drop or stay the same. A lot of young people smoke marijuana because of the forbidden fruit syndrome. You take away that criminal allure and suddenly consumption rates go down. So the only things that would happen would be good things.
All right, but some say that if you decriminalize, the only people who benefit from that are the criminal gangs who control the supply operations.
No. Once you remove the criminal sanction, the prices decrease. There's something called a crime tariff. When there's illegal contraband, organized crime can make a lot of money off the product. Once you decriminalize, there's less profit involved, and it'll become more of a cottage industry with people simply growing for themselves. You get rid of organized criminality when you remove the criminal sanction.
So you think that this will limit people to strictly homegrown operations? Won't they go elsewhere to buy?
No, I don't think so, and it'll be a very small market. There's really no reason for organized crime to get involved with a product that is decriminalized. They will stick to cocaine and heroin, and that's unfortunate. It ravages the country. But in terms of marijuana, no, it'll be just a cottage industry of people smoking marijuana, sort of like a 60s hippie commune almost. Really, it's not a criminal issue.
But it's not a small cottage industry. This is a massive industry. It's British Columbia's largest cash crop.
No question, but 80% of marijuana now is grown domestically. We do not import marijuana from foreign jurisdictions. When you don't have to import, you don't need organized crime. I represent lots of cultivators, and they may grow large commercial operations, but they are not the type of criminal that we actually are afraid of.
All right. People who are afraid of this direction that Canada may be taking, and in just a few minutes I'm going to be talking to U.S. Drug Czar John Walters, a man you know well. He said this week decriminalizing Canadian laws will rile his government, and they're going to clamp down on our border. First of all, should we proceed anyway?
Oh, yeah. We are not the 51st state. We're a sovereign nation. The United States is out of step with the rest of the world. The Western world has decriminalized largely, and Canada should follow suit. And we should show the United States we are a sovereign nation in terms of domestic policy. We should not be afraid of them.
Okay, but there's a good chance that this has been a factor in why we haven't proceeded down this road, as you said, for many, many years.
For 30 years, they've been holding us back, no question in my mind.
So how do we overcome the American objections?
We simply have to realize that they are full of hysteria. They have a war on drugs, and you have to understand one of the tools of war is propaganda. So they are going to spread so much misinformation about marijuana and what's happening in Canada. We have to just simply hold tight and realize that we are moving along the right path. We're doing what Europe has done, what Australia has done. This is a benign substance, and we should should not let a rabid American drug policy force our hand.
All right. So the Senate committee this past few days, legalization, we heard talk in the throne speech, decriminalization. Where would you like to see it fall?
Well, ultimately, I'd like to see it legalized, but as a baby step, decriminalization is a good thing because it'll show Canadians that the country won't go to pot, so to speak. We need to move slowly because there are some people who are hesitant, but ultimately it should be legalized distribution and taxed like any other product. There'll be a lot of money to spread around for government coffers.
And do you think we'll actually see it come through this time?
Well, it all depends on how we deal with the Americans. If we stand steadfast in our own mission, we will be fine. But if we simply allow ourselves to be subdued by American influence, we will maintain this folly for another 30 years.
Alan Young in Toronto, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Here's a statement you may remember. When I was in England, I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it, and didn't inhale, and never tried it again. The words of then Governor Bill Clinton. There are few governments in the world more obsessed with drug control than the United States. As you can imagine, they're not amused with Ottawa's musings on decriminalizing marijuana. John Walters is director of the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy and joins us now in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Mr. Walters.
Pleasure to be with you.
You said something this week, sir, that provoked many people here in this country. I'd like to read it back to you. You said, I hope the Canadian government does not head down the risky path of decriminalization or legalization. Why is it risky?
Well, my father was born in Toronto. I went to school at the University of Toronto. I have a special personal tie to Canada, as I think many Americans do. This isn't a, squabble, I think, among some of the closest neighbors in the history of humankind. From my point of view, the United States has learned long and hard the dangers of marijuana, and I would hate to see Canada have to not learn from our lesson, because it's a lot of pain. Today in the United States, the single biggest drug of abuse is marijuana. Of the 6 million people we're trying to provide treatment for, over 60% have a dependency on marijuana. People my age don't understand the danger it poses here, and they don't understand that for young people in particular, we have more juveniles today coming in for marijuana dependency than for alcohol, and they are more dependency on marijuana than all other legal drugs combined.
Okay, so those are the risks you see for this So are you afraid for us some sort of reefer madness? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm afraid that there's kind of reefer madness, that people watched this movie in the past and said, oh, there's too much hysteria about marijuana, and they forgot about it. I mean, people my age who are baby boomers have to remember that the marijuana was talked about when they were teenagers had 1% THC content, the psychoactive ingredient. Today on the street in the United States, it goes from 7 to over 10%, and there are high potency varieties, some of which are grown in British Columbia, that go to 20 to 30% THC content. This is not your father's marijuana here in the United States. It's a much greater substance of abuse. 8th graders have doubled their use here. So this is an issue that affects children, and it is the single biggest source of addiction that we're trying to treat. People in the United States don't understand that. I also hope that people in Canada have at least that information.
All right, let me interrupt here. And yet, despite all of the argument you just made, from Australia to the UK to Holland to 12 American states, and Nevada may follow in November, already have variations of decriminalization for possession. Why is your office then out of sync with what seems to be sort of worldwide public opinion on pot?
Well, I don't think we are out of sync, frankly. First of all, in the United States generally, there is no massive groundswell for legalization. There have been well-funded efforts by George Soros and 2 very wealthy individuals that have expanded outside the United States to create a con. That marijuana is medicine, that marijuana is harmless, that marijuana is not a drug of abuse, that marijuana should be treated like alcohol. Again, look at what's happening in Europe. Take the example that's frequently used. Holland is on the verge of anything, of toughening up its laws because of an enormous growth in crime and in not only marijuana consumption, but in cocaine and heroin. The argument was you could medicalize this. But think about what that argument really means. How is the disease of addiction spread? It's spread by non-addictive users. They're the carriers. If you want more addiction, increase the number of carriers. That's what drug legalization does. And the fact of the matter is, we already have too many people who are victims of this substance and the dependency it produces. Why would you want to create more?
Well, I guess that's the big question, is it? Already you've said your war on drugs and all of your hard stand and prohibition has not stopped people. Marijuana is available. People are continuing to smoke it. So why then not take a more realistic approach and move toward decriminalization?
Yeah, I think that's a misunderstanding of maybe the way the war on drugs was used that we've created, and I think we need to correct it. The old view of when the war on drugs was used as a phrase, it was to try to bring society together, make this a priority, and do a better job against the drug problem. That still needs to be done, but they left the impression there's going to be one time or another time. Keeping people healthy is a public health problem, just as raising young people and educating them is a problem that you have to, at a civilized society, has to continue. You don't say you spent some money, the problem's not over, so you quit and let more people be addicted. It is a responsibility of civilized society to prevent young people from becoming addicted to addictive substances, even if you're not perfect.
Let me move to another subject, Mr. Walters. You said also this week in response to our throne speech that Canada's decriminalization would prompt U.S. lawmakers to tighten border controls and disrupt Canada-U.S. trade. What did you mean by that?
I don't think I said that. I think actually a member of Congress said that in the same article. But look, I believe that our countries are working together now across the northern border for the war on terror, as well as increased problems with drugs. I've met with Canadian officials in Ottawa. I've met with Canadian officials in our western states. We are now a major supplier of cocaine to Canada, and it's being exchanged for high-potency marijuana and the precursor chemicals from methamphetamine, which Canada is supplying to us. Our law enforcement, our CMP and our DEA and other law enforcement agencies are working better to create a better way of protecting both of our populations, which is what I think both countries are concerned about, and rightly so.
But because this whole move toward decriminalization is for personal use, small amounts of pot for personal use, trafficking would, of course, still remain illegal.
Well, the problem, of course, with drugs has been that it's an insidious destroyer and user of national boundaries as a shield. We have this problem in the southern part of this hemisphere. Mexico, Colombia have been ravaged by drugs that are now becoming problems of dependency in their own population. Some of the greatest growth we've had in relationships with them is sending information on treatment and prevention to Canada, and not only Canada, but Mexico and Colombia, I should say, and other nations in the hemisphere. No nation has ever been a major source or transit nation without developing devastating consumption problems within its own boundaries.
All right.
That's the broader history here, and I just hope that in the debate, and Canada is a sovereign country, it will make up its own mind. They are responsible people. They are people who we respect. The comments I've made are simply to say, don't not learn from the pain and suffering that we've had to endure too much because of bad choices by Americans.
U.S. Drug Czar John Walters, thank you from Washington tonight. So there you have it. To smoke or not to smoke? More on marijuana, plus taxes, tigers, and a manly poke at the monarchy. Our panel is next. We're back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to Global Sunday. Marijuana, the grand plan for the country, and a snub fit for a queen. There is plenty to talk about this week, so let's introduce our panel. In the nation's capital, from the National Post, Ottawa Bureau Chief Robert Fife and political writer Ann Dawson. Welcome to you both. And joining us in Vancouver, co-chair of the Commons Committee on Non-Medical Use of Drugs, Alliance MP Randy White. Welcome to you, Randy. And let me start with you, Randy. Your draft report, your committee's draft report comes out on Tuesday. What are we going to see in that?
Well, you won't see legalization of marijuana, that's for sure. You're going to see, you're not going to see much at all, actually. The committee's going to look at it and go through the recommendations, but hopefully the concentration is going to be on cocaine and heroin, as we originally intended, ecstasy, prescription drugs, and we will address the issue of marijuana.
All right, you two in Ottawa, do you think this time, after 30 years of discussion, the Liberals are actually going to go down the road of decriminalization?
Well, personally, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, the Prime Minister is trying to establish a so-called legacy agenda as he heads out the door. The last thing he's going to be wanting to put on his plate is decriminalization of marijuana. And it's just too divisive an issue, and as we saw earlier in the program, you have the United States saying, don't do this.
That's right.
So I just cannot see this being, in reality, anything that's going to happen in this current Prime Minister's term.
Is that you have to understand the Prime Minister wants to present a very busy agenda for the last 12, 14 months in office, and this makes him look young, fresh. He's prepared to consider all these new options. I think it's just being floated
out there.
It's a diversion.
Well, you said divisive as well, Robert, and it is 50-50. Canadians are split on legalization, more in favor of decriminalization. What do you think, Randy? Is he going to go down this path?
Well, this is a diversion, I think, to try to get us off on some other discussions other than Gretchen Martin and a few other things. No, I think what's going to happen here in Canada, we're going to look at alternative measures. That is not change the criminal code, but but look at alternative measures within the criminal code that don't necessarily result in a criminal conviction for the small use of marijuana.
That's decriminalization as opposed to legalization.
Well, not really. Decriminalization is generally considered a summary conviction or a fine
right.
for the small use, and if you don't pay the fine, then a criminal conviction.